Hello and welcome to my channel. This one will be in charcoal. It's going to be a landscape with some clouds towering over a mountain. First I'm going to do a quick simple sketch and then I'll switch to charcoal. I just want to work out the shape and the placement of the mountain, and then we're going to do the sky. I'll start by putting down some charcoal powder. I created the charcoal powder by sharpening one of my charcoal pencils, and I will be using Maestro woodless charcoal pencils, 2 grade, medium and soft, as usual. After that, I'm going to use a piece of paper towel, and I'm going to blend like this. I'm going to use very little pressure and blend using a circular motion. I want to push around that charcoal dust, distribute it evenly so that I can blend everything smoothly. This is going to be the sky, so I don't want lines, details, textures in there. I want it to look fairly smooth. After that, I'm switching to an eraser. I'm going to use 2 kinds of erasers. The Tombow Mono Zero eraser you see on the left, and this kneaded eraser, or kneadable eraser. This is a Faber-Castell kneaded eraser. And for those of you who are completely new to drawing, a kneaded eraser can be shaped to whatever you like, and it lifts up charcoal, allowing you to create these lighter marks, which is what I'm doing now. There are essentially, it's kind of sticky and it just picks up the charcoal dust, leaving areas of lighter value. So there are basically 2 things you can do with a kneaded eraser. You can dab or you can drag, or you can use a combination of the 2, which is what I do most of the time, obviously. When you dab, you lift up a little bit of charcoal, then the kneaded eraser picks up, because it's sticky, like I said, it picks up a little bit of charcoal and then you put it back in as you're dabbing, so that creates smoother transitions between the areas of lighter and darker value and softer edges and stuff like that. That can be done for certain effects like fluffy, wispier clouds with less defined edges. If you want cleaner marks, if you want to create a whiter, lighter mark, then you're gonna use a dragging motion, in which case the eraser will clean up that part of the paper that you're working on a little bit more thoroughly. As you can see here, I'm using a combination of the 2 methods to create all kinds of shapes that look like clouds. Actually, a group of clouds looming over these mountain peaks. My reference photo will be in the description if you want to check it out. And as usual, I'm using the reference as a sort of a guideline. I don't intend to try to copy every single cloud or every single shape that I see. The paper I'm working on is about 9 times 12 inches in size, and it's a Fabriano sketching paper. So I'm not finished with the clouds just yet. I'm going to do a little bit more refining on them. But here I wanted to draw the outline or the edge of those mountains before I start working on the clouds. So I switched to a Tombow Mono Zero eraser. This is a precision eraser. It's a soft rubber eraser in a mechanical pencil, in a mechanical whatever holder, and you can use it in the same way that you would use a pencil. It's very convenient for drawing, except for the fact that instead of drawing darker marks that you normally do when you use pencils, you draw lighter marks. So I cleaned up the upper edge of those clouds to make that, to create more contrast between the upper edge of the clouds and the background. And now I added a little bit of shadow on the lower side of those clouds. The light source is coming from above, which means that the upper portion of those shapes of those clouds is going to be lighter, and the part of the clouds which is facing down or away from that light source is going to be in the shadow. It's going to be a little bit darker, and I need to define that contrast in order to make the clouds look more three-dimensional, because after all, clouds are three-dimensional objects. So in order to make them look more three-dimensional, in order to make them look more realistic, I need that range of value, I need that contrast in value. So now the clouds are starting to look a little bit more realistic, and I'm going to do some shading on the mountain. I switched to another drawing tool. This is a piece of vine charcoal. This is not a charcoal pencil. Vine charcoal comes in sticks of irregular shapes, and it's natural, soft natural charcoal that's created by burning wood. It's very easy to move around and manipulate, but it's usually a little bit lighter than compressed charcoal. So I added a little bit of charcoal powder from my charcoal pencils on top of that, and now I'm pushing that in with my finger. I want to blend with my finger now because the charcoal from the vine charcoal sticks doesn't really stick to the surface of the paper as much. It kind of, you can move it around, so you need to push it in. Here I already started working with a pencil eraser, with the Tombow Mono Zero eraser, to draw some lighter marks on the mountain, to create some suggestions of lighter shapes, like maybe some bare rocks or parts of that rocky terrain which are more exposed to the light source. And if you look at the reference, you will see that there are some very light details on the mountain, like maybe some patches of snow on one of those peaks. So I'm going to put those in, and I'm going to create those lighter marks by putting a little bit more pressure and using the Tombow Mono Zero eraser. Don't worry if these shapes and these marks don't look exactly the same as the reference. That's not really important. So now that I've done most of the mountain and most of the clouds, I'm starting to work on the trees in the foreground. I'm going to be drawing these trees by drawing a vertical line first, and then drawing the shapes on the sides, like the branches and the foliage growing out to the side. These are all going to be coniferous evergreen trees. So I want to draw conical shapes that taper at the top. And because all of these trees are objects seen from a distance, I don't need to try to make them too detailed. What I want to do is capture the general appearance, the general shape of those trees, and the general appearance of their texture, if you will, how the foliage looks as seen from a distance. So once I do some pencil work, I switch to a brush and do some blending to soften those marks, and that will make it a bit darker but also a little bit softer, and it will make the canopies look a bit more dense. And I want it to look darker as well, because that way I can create some contrast between those trees and the mountain in the back. So I want the trees to stand out against that shape of the mountain, and I want to be able to create some contrast and tension between the darker shapes in the foreground and the lighter shapes in the background. I'm using a soft pencil now, soft charcoal pencil, to create some darker details in between those trees and on those trees, and also maybe a little bit at the bottom where there's going to be a bit more shadow. So the soft charcoal pencil is a little bit darker than the medium charcoal pencil. It's a little bit softer and crumblier, but also a bit darker. So I'm using it to create some even darker areas or portions of even darker value. Here at the bottom there's going to be a little bit more shadow. So I'm drawing some more trees. As always, I draw a vertical line to position the tree and to give myself a rough idea about its size and shape, and then I just draw these more or less horizontal marks and try to imitate the conical shape of a coniferous tree. And I'm going to draw a bunch more of them. This is not overly complex, but it's a little bit time consuming because you need to do a lot of scribbling with a pencil if you want to create a texture that looks like actual trees. It doesn't look like much now, but when you go over it with a blending tool, it starts to look a lot more dense and a lot more realistic. And I'm using a couple of different types of brushes. I'm going to shade the rest of the mountain here on the right, and I'm going to use vine charcoal for that first to establish some base value, and then after that I may make some portions of it a little bit darker, others a little bit lighter, by using one of my erasers. So now I'm going to do a little bit of blending. I just got to make sure that I put down enough of the material. As I'm blending this vine charcoal with my finger, you can see that there is actually a little bit of texture here. I'm actually not going to try to remove that. I'm going to try to use that to my advantage, if you will. I made a little bit of a mess here, so I'm going to try to fix it to preserve that clean edge between the mountain and the clouds. So I'm going to use that texture to my advantage because I want to keep it to suggest the shape and the appearance of rough, rocky terrain. But the main goal here is to establish an area of darker value, to establish that darker base value so that the shape of the mountain would stand out against the lighter shapes of the clouds. After that, I'm continuing to work on the trees. And I'm doing the same thing. I'm using the medium charcoal pencil for the most part, as you can see. And just drawing those small shapes with it. I draw the vertical line and then the rest of the tree. And before you know it, you have a forest. Here I drew a slightly larger, taller one because maybe it's a little bit closer to our viewpoint, and I wanted it to overlap with that shape of the mountain peak in the back so that I could create a little bit of contrast between the two. I switched back to the Tombow Mono Zero eraser now because I have to add some of these lighter details on the mountain, on the other side of the mountain, because I gotta finish that first before I do the rest of the trees. So once again, I'm drawing these lighter shapes on the mountain. Maybe it's, like I said, maybe it's some of the bare rocks that aren't covered by woods or trees. Maybe it's lighter parts of those rocks which are more exposed to the light source. Maybe it's some leftover patches of snow which haven't melted yet. We don't really need to know what all of these are, but as long as I can keep that contrast between the lighter and darker shapes, I will create an illusion like the viewer is looking at rough, rocky terrain of a mountain slope. So finally, once I got that done, I'm continuing to work on the trees. And I'm going to draw a lot more trees here in the middle and to the right. Your charcoal pencil doesn't even have to be super sharp for this, but it should be, I guess, fairly sharp or not completely dull. These woodless charcoal pencils, in my experience, they can be sharpened pretty well, and that's one of the main reasons why I'm using them. And as you can see, when I'm drawing, 90% of the time I'm actually using the medium charcoal pencil. I just throw in a little bit of soft charcoal pencil here and there when I want to increase the range of value or create some extra deep, extra dark shadow areas. I'm adding some more trees to the right. These are going to be even taller, and once I finish those, I will pretty much have completed that part of the scene, and I'm going to do a little bit more work on the foreground. I actually don't plan to put in a lot of detail in the grassy foreground here. I'm just going to shade it a little bit with some vine charcoal to establish an area of slightly darker value, but obviously a lot lighter than that row of trees. And I'm first going to blend it with my finger, and then maybe think about adding some details to it later. But I also need to add some more details to the trees. So I'm going back in with a soft charcoal pencil, and now I'm adding some of those deeper shadow areas. So I'm basically trying to break up that large group of trees into smaller shapes, and by adding these areas of darker value which are in between the individual trees, I am allowing the viewer to find it easier to discern individual shapes in that group of trees, I suppose. So I'm working with a soft charcoal pencil here, deepening these shadows between them. But in addition to the soft charcoal pencil, I will actually do a little bit more work with an eraser as well. So just like I made some darker shapes to increase the range of value, I can do the opposite. I can now lift up a little bit of charcoal, create some lighter shapes to further increase that range of value and make some of the lighter parts of those canopies stand out even more in contrast with those shadow areas. Here I can also add some shadows to the foreground area, like some shadows under these trees in the foreground, and maybe some suggestions of grass or clumps of grass, some variation in the terrain, a variation in the length and the type of grass, things like that. Here I'm doing some more refining on the trees. This time using a Tombow Mono 0 eraser, basically doing the same thing, pulling some lighter strokes in order to make these lighter parts of the canopies stand out. So I want to make it look like some of these branches and clusters of needles are sticking out and catching more light from the light source. Here I'm trying to finish things by doing more work on the foreground area, this grassy area at the bottom, and I'm dragging my charcoal pencil, allowing it to create some random detail and random texture. In landscapes like these, you don't want to try to draw every single detail. You want to try to create an illusion of detail, and you can often do that just by allowing the pencil to create a bit of texture of its own. I can also add some lighter details using the pencil eraser. I've been using this Tombow Mono Zero eraser here for the most part, but I also have the Kohinoor pencil eraser. It's pretty much the same thing, it does the same thing. Sometimes I find this Tombow Mono Zero eraser more convenient, sometimes the kneaded eraser is more convenient. It depends on the situation, but the kneaded eraser doesn't leave any residue, so that's a good thing. But like I said, here in the foreground I did some work with the Tombow Mono Zero, and now I'm softening everything with a large brush. And I think I'm almost done. I'm just going to modify the bottom part of these trees here on the right. And finally I'm going to put my signature on the left. And this is the finished drawing. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoy the drawing process. Don't forget to check out my other videos. And if you want to see more content and longer full-length narrative videos, check out my Patreon. Bye bye.